Welcome to Sunlit Brushstrokes. Today we'll be painting these lovely fall cards together. I'll show you how I draw these easy pumpkins, my step-by-step painting process, and finally how I assemble them into cards. Let's go ahead and get started. So for the cards, you're going to want to have a blank card. I usually just buy cardstock and fold it in half, or I should say cut it in half and then fold it in half. So this would be a quarter fold card. And you're going to want to cut your pieces of watercolor paper to fit this. Now you can either cut a piece of watercolor paper. So this is cut like 5.5 by 4.25 so that it fits perfectly as the cover for your card. But what I actually like to do is to cut a piece of watercolor paper slightly smaller so that I've got room for a slight border. And then I'll take a colored piece of cardstock and I'll put that on first, tape it on, and then I'll put my small piece or my small painting on top of that. So that's personally how I like doing my cards, but you can definitely cut your watercolor paper how you would like. So sometimes I might make it just like 1/8 of an inch on all sides. Other times I'll do 1/4 of an inch. You can do what you would like. So to draw a pumpkin, what I like to do is there's a couple ways you can kind of approach this. You could start with one little shape at a time, and I'll show you how I typically draw a pumpkin, and then I'll show you a tip that might help. So what I like to do is draw this center oval first. This is kind of like the first section on the pumpkin. I'll go a little bit heavier so that you can actually see what shape I've got here. It's kind of an oval shape. And then I'll come in and do one on either side of it. That's kind of like they're overlapped almost, like you can't see the full side, right, of this one. So I'm just going to do that on both sides. And I tend to draw with very loose, almost like sketchy lines here, just to make sure I'm happy with what I'm getting. And then with this, I've gone and done almost like C-shape sort of sections to the pumpkin on either side. And you can see they're a lot smaller in width as they get further from the center because more of them are turning around the edges of the pumpkin. You can't see them. So then I'll go ahead and do myself a nice thick stem for our pumpkin. And you can make it looking kind of rustic, add some detail to the top if you want, or just a really rough look because that typically is the way they look. And then here I start to bring these sections inwards to the center of the pumpkin. And then I'll do a couple little bumps in the back and almost make them join. Sometimes I'll have spacing slightly different, but this is looking a little bit goofy here. Let me just fix that. Hard to tell what I'm doing there, isn't it? Kind of had more than one line drawn. Let's go like this. Let's raise this one here a little bit more, and then we've got our pumpkin. And then I'll show you a tip that you could try if you would like. It may be helpful to, instead of doing each section and wondering how they're all going to fit together, you could just start by drawing a circle first, or an oval. Maybe do it a little bit wider than it is tall. Something like that. Again, you can see when I draw, I'm very loose. I press very lightly, and I tend to just come in with multiple light lines until I get the thing that I'm really happy with. But anyways, you could start with a circle, and then you could do your plan to put your stem somewhere in here. Now I'm not going to define the bottom of it too much yet because I want to have the freedom to do that based on where my pumpkin sections are going to fall. And I actually don't like that stem so much. Let's make it have a little bit more swoopiness. That's not a word, is it? Anyways, and then I'm going to come in and do the same thing, but this time I can do my round oval shape here. And at least now with this circle, I kind of have some guidelines to help me figure out where I want to be kind of landing with my little shapes. Now this one, I actually am inclined to just make it come out just a bit more. I kind of like the pumpkin to be a little bit fatter, if that makes sense. A little wider. I think it's cute that way. And then this is where I kind of start letting these kind of come towards the center. And then in this case, you can see if I space these evenly, it's going to feel like I've got room for a third one behind there, but you're not going to be able to see it very much. And then one over here. So sometimes you'll have the space for like 2 sections in the back, like I had here, where you could feel like it maybe just joins like that. But in this case, I feel like I had room for 3. And so I divided that back section into 3. So you kind of just have to eyeball and feel how much space is back there. And you do want to kind of think you want them to look about the same width as this, and yet because they're further back there, they might be just a smidgen smaller, say, or narrower than what you would have these ones here at the front. And before I paint it, I always like to go over it and just lightly lift excess graphite off. I don't want to have a lot of pencil lines here because, as you know, once your graphite gets wet, which is what's happening with the watercolor, you will make everything permanent and you don't want your outline to be too bold. So just make sure you have enough detail so you can see what you're doing and that you don't get lost, and then take everything else off. And finally, I've drawn myself a guideline on my page, and I'm going to write the words "give thanks." Let's go ahead and draw our pumpkin pattern. This time I've got my slightly larger piece of paper, but you can use whichever one you want. This is the one that actually would fill the whole front of my card. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to maybe start with like the 5 pumpkins, but what I'm going to do is just start with that circle outline. And I'm going to have them slightly tilted on their sides, so you can almost imagine that the center of the pumpkin is like there. Does that make sense? So I'm going to see if I can fit 5 of them on here somewhat randomly. And again, if it helps for you to draw a center line, because we're tipping them around, you don't have to even tip your pumpkins. You can just do them perfectly straight, like this one I'm doing here. So you could say the center line is right there. So do what you want, do what you're comfortable with. I'm going to make some of them kind of almost like they're coming off the page. I really want it to look random. So maybe one here. I don't know if this is random enough. Looks like it's somewhat lined up. Could always make a couple of them more, I don't know, coming off the page. Does that look silly? Let's try that. So that's where I'm going to draw my pumpkins. And you can see I've gone very lightly. Let's go ahead and draw our pumpkins in. So you can do your pumpkin drawing the same way. Now, of course, I have our outline here. If you want to start with your stem, you can. That might be the easiest way. Again, I don't like to define my lower section of my stem too much. I want that to be defined by my sections here of my pumpkin. So if you kind of tip this so that you can have it straight, if that helps, you can. And I'm going to draw these sections in. The thing that you have to watch for is that you don't make this one in the front come too much lower than these 2 beside it. If it happens that way, you can always drop these 2 a little lower or just gently lift that one up a bit. You want everything to kind of land about the same place on the bottom. These ones are just going to come up ever so slightly, but not too much. And then again, these ones are coming all the way around. And you can see how scratchy I am with my drawing here. I don't come in with like big, bold pencil lines. I like to just take it sort of tentatively and make sure I'm happy. And that, I'll be honest, is the way I draw, even though I've been drawing for many years. I still tend to come in with a little bit more of a tentative approach. Okay, let's go this way. And if you don't want to tip your page, you don't have to, but I think that keeps your pumpkins a little more straight. Or I should say in line with kind of the axis of the pumpkin line, right? This one looks like I might end up having smaller sections, so I might end up with a bit more. We'll see. Oh, maybe not. You might prefer to do these small pumpkins first. It gives you lots of practice. Or you could even grab your sketchbook and practice drawing pumpkins in your sketchbook until you feel comfortable and confident, and then take a jump into doing your cards. Now that we have our pumpkins done, we can go ahead and add some leaves. So I'm going to start with drawing some sticks where I'm going to place my leaves, or I should say the little twigs, branches, whatever, and then I'll be putting the leaves on top of these. I might make some of my leaves come upside down, we'll see. Anyways, I'm just going to draw some loose leaves here. And I'm going to be using some of the same loose leaf techniques I've used in some of my other videos. And I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. It's always kind of helpful to almost let yourself have the shakes or just have a really loose touch with your pencil so that you can get some nice organic looking leaves. Sometimes I move things around depending on where I have space for leaves. And then I'm going to add some of these cute little swirly things. Kind of like the pumpkin vine. So some of them can be like little S's, some of them are just like little curls. For this next card, I'm going to stick with my pattern theme, but this time I'm going to use leaves and berries. I'm drawing the berries first and grouping them into clusters, and then I'll join them with some small stems. Now I'm going to do the same thing with my teardrop shaped leaves. I like creating small groups of 2 or 3 leaves first, so that this kind of becomes like a larger element. And I always want to lay down my largest shapes first, and then I go back in and fill the small gaps with either single leaves or tiny leaf clusters. You can see more details on how I create these leaves in my video on simple doodles for your journal. I enjoy scripture writing, and I think simple leaves like these are perfect for that. But as you can see, they also work really well for cards. I'll include a link for that video in the description below. Now you're going to see as I go about my painting today that I'm going to be working in an assembly line style. I like to do that when I'm working on projects that are similar to each other. So I'll do all of the oranges first, or say the pumpkins, then I'll move on to another shape. I'll probably be doing all of my greens at the same time. That way I can just work on one color mixture at a time. And the cards are able to dry between stages. I don't have to stop and get the hairdryer. I can just stay in the flow, go from one card to the next. And that might be something that you find helpful for your own creative process. A couple round brushes I'm using today. I have a number 6 Simply Simmons and a number 8 Artegria round brush. And the reason I've got both of these is because I want the opportunity to use a nice soft brush, which is the Artegria brush, and it's got a really nice fine point on it for doing the tips of your leaves. But we might find that having a firmer brush, such as the Simply Simmons brush, could be handy for some of the smaller shapes. So we'll see. We might be able to get away with just using this one, but either brush is fine. Use what you have. And I have a mixture of watercolor paints here. So these are just my primary colors that I use for mixing, but I have made a nice golden yellow, an orange, and a deep red, as well as a olive green and a purple. So I'm hoping these colors will provide what I'm after for this painting today. Actually, I could probably even get by with a larger brush on the pumpkins because they are quite big. We'll see. This is another Artegria. This is a size 10. So I'm not quite filling in all of the spaces. Probably could have erased more of my pencil, but oh well. I'm going to leave more white gaps and I can fill them in later if I feel like I've got too many. I'd rather have my white gaps a little too pronounced to start with. I'm just going to throw more water into some of these shapes so they don't dry too quickly. I'm going to join them at the bottom there. Again, I'm leaving those gaps and I can fill them in more after I get all of my paint on here. I'd rather have too much white than not enough. Then I'm going to grab some of my shadow colors. So that's going to be this deep red. I'm going to be working this direction. So I'm going to grab this deeper red color that I've mixed up, and I'm going to throw it on this side of the pumpkin. Whoa, that was more than I expected, but this is my shadow side. I'm calling the light source as coming from over here. And so I'm going to put more of this color on the left, and I'm going to do it on the left side of each of these little shapes. And I'm just letting those colors kind of blend. So I'm just dropping it in with a little bit of a linear brush stroke so that it looks like these are just kind of following the way that these little pumpkin sections are. And I'm putting less and less and keeping it to the left side mostly of each shape, and putting less as I come closer to the right side. So you can see there's less shadow. Let's put a little bit more over here. Less shadow as I come towards the light. Now there's going to be a cast shadow where this stem is casting a shadow on this part of the pumpkin. And this is where now I'm going to come in, and this is also going to be a little less light over here on that, in that section there. This is where I'm going to come in now and fill in some of my gaps, because I've definitely got more white than I need. But like I say, I'd rather have too much than not enough. And that's going to help these colors sort of stay separate. And then if I really want to push my shadows further, I can grab some purple. So I could put a little tiny bit of purple on the furthest left side of this pumpkin. And things are going to be kind of puddling and pooling, and that is okay. I'm just gonna grab a little bit of water here and just blend this shape out here. I feel like it could be a little bit softer edged. Again, it's fine to have some hard edges or blooms happening. And then I'll just come in this lighter section. I've got water on my brush, and obviously I'm picking up a bit of paint as I come here, but I'm just gonna try and fill in some of these gaps just a little bit. Now that I kind of can see where the paint is moving, I have to be careful when I do this that I don't overfill them. I want those white spaces to still show, but I can kind of control things a little bit more. I don't mind if I kind of lose some of my lights down at the bottom here. Let's just let those disappear on me. And this section here, where it's a nice deep dark puddle, that probably will create some blooms. If you don't want to have as much of that, they sometimes will call it cauliflower effect, which you can kind of see starting to happen over here. If you don't want as much of that on this bottom section, you can soak some of it up. So just grab yourself a paper towel and just soak a little bit up with your brush. I'm actually kind of wanting a little bit of that happening, so I don't want to soak too much up, but just be aware that's what you're going to get happening where you have puddles. You'll have some kind of blooms and whatnot. So just take out as much as you need to kind of control that water so it's not too puddly. All right. That one's drying. I'm going to work on my mini pumpkins, and everything here, the pencil is very dark, has a lot of lines, so you want to go over it and just quickly lift out a lot of your dark shapes. Definitely get rid of those axis lines, if you want to call them that we gave to our pumpkins to make sure we were doing it straight. Get rid of anything that you don't want to have showing too boldly after we've added the paint. So I'm just going over everything with my kneadable eraser and lightening it up. All right, let's jump in with our orange, and I'm going to use the same technique I used before so that I can do it all in one shot. Oh, I joined those together more than I intended to. That's okay. It'll be what it will be. And I'm not painting these shapes perfectly, as you can see. I'm just going for a nice loose watercolor look. Then I'm picking up my darker colors. So once again, the red, and I'm going to keep my light source the same. Keep it so that the shadow is always on the left side of these pumpkins. Of course, it doesn't have to be that way, but just keeping it consistent throughout all my paintings today. Okay, I think that's probably enough of the dark purple. What do you guys think? You can always come in and fill in some of those little light sections after it's partly dry. The white gaps help you keep your shadows on the left side of each of these little sections. Otherwise, everything would blur together. But once you've gotten all of your shapes the way you want them, you can definitely come back in and always throw a little bit more orange into your white spaces if it feels too white for you. You'll want to clean your brush between pumpkins, of course, because you've got a nice dark purple on there, or else use more than one brush, and that's another option. You can have one brush for your oranges and one for your dark colors. I'm going to just carry on, repeat the steps, filling in all the oranges, and while it's still wet, I'll come and drop my shadow colors. Once I'm happy with my pumpkins, I'm going to let them dry before I add my green leaves. And then I'm going to start into my next card. Like I say, I do work assembly line style here. I'm just filling in these berries with our nice deep red here. And I'm using a firmer brush. I'm using the Simply Simmons brush because I think it makes it easier to do these circles a little bit more circular. Now the pumpkin is almost dry. You can see there's a bit of wetness still there, but I'm going to go ahead and do the stem. I mixed up a little bit of brown in my well here where the purple is. I just put it to one side. I'm going to use a variety of colors to create this stem. Put a tiny bit of kind of a yellowy orange color, and then I'm dropping in some of my brownish color, and I am leaving white gaps for sure. Get it nice and dark at the base. But you could even make the stem with a little bit more green on it if you like. I feel like this is almost too dark. So I'm just going to lift a little bit out of it. Let's just grab a tissue. Maybe I will throw a little bit of green in there. I was kind of thinking a brown stem, but sometimes the stems aren't fully brown, right? Because they do have some green still. So I'll drop some green in there along with my brown. And I want to create a little bit of a jagged edge at the top. And then you can go darkest at the bottom where it is kind of attaching to the pumpkin, and it will be more shaded on the left side. So I'll just lift a little bit of this out of the right side. I'd even throw a bit of purple on the left side. Just kind of turning brown because of the mixture of colors I have here, or mixture that's on my brush. But I don't know, I don't want to overwork this, but I'm also concerned of getting too dark. I don't know. I can always come in and throw a little bit of color on this one after. Just lift a bit out so I don't go too dark too soon. Actually, I'm almost liking it like that. I'm going to use my gold color to do the leaves here, and then I'm going to drop just a tiny little bit of purple in some of the spots on these leaves just to create a bit of variety. So I'm going to have 2 paintbrushes on the go. Might even use the purple for the stems. Why don't we try that? And I add the purple while the yellow is still wet so that the colors will mingle. And I'm definitely also trying to make sure that as I apply my yellow, I'm not going solid. I'm letting myself just take some brush strokes within kind of the way the leaf is shaped and leaving some white gaps where my brush naturally wants to leave them. Stroking down on the teardrop, and you can see I'm almost naturally creating some white areas. Just try not to fill it up. And then come in with your purple. I decided to do these longer leaves with the orange, and then I'm once again repeating the same idea for the stems. I'm dropping some purple in while it's still wet. And then in a few places, I'm actually throwing a tiny bit of red just so that these leaves definitely look different than our yellow leaves, because sometimes the orange almost is a little too on the yellow side. In my opinion, at least my orange and yellow can sometimes be a little too close. So I'm just pushing my reds a little bit further in some of these leaves. Now with this one, I decided to come in and use green for the stems of my berries and throw a few green leaves on there as well. I'm using my Artegria brush so I get nice fine tips on the tiny little leaves that I'm doing. And I find that the green is really helping bring this to life. And so I'm just going to keep throwing some little leaves in here just to fill in the empty spaces. All right, I'm ready to add the green to this and to do the pumpkin stems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my green, and I'm going to just very lightly paint in these little stems, again leaving gaps. And I'm going to come in with a bit of purple or brown to create the shadows on these little stems. Don't quite like my white gap in there, but that's okay. It can be like that. I've discovered this paper definitely doesn't like it if I try and go in with another layer when it's dry. You can play with that, but it can definitely mess things up. So I'd rather just probably leave it like that and just maybe fill it in with a little bit more green. Just make the stem bigger. And then I'm going to come in with my green and do some nice loose leaves using the same sort of technique I showed you in the tutorial on loose watercolor leaves, except this time I'm going to be using a lot more green, and I'll just drop some of the gold color into my green. And I'm using a separate brush for that, for the gold. And it's not even necessary, actually, you know, you can just go with green leaves if you want. I'm going to probably drop some of the gold in just a few places just so that I have some variety. And once again, I am leaving white gaps in my leaf. So again, nice and fine. I'm using very light pressure at the top of my leaf, and then I'm coming down and using the belly of the brush to create a nice wide section to my leaf. That one I didn't do so well with keeping my whites. I do try and leave a bit of a gap between my green brush strokes. And if you change things up from the way you originally drew them, don't worry about it. It's better to let things be loose and let the brush and the paint kind of do what it wants to do rather than to kind of force it if you want that really nice loose look. And where I'm working with two leaves really close together, I'm going to be leaving a gap where things are kind of touching or overlapping, just so that they don't bleed into each other there. But you could definitely join them as well. I just prefer to keep them separate. Let's get some more gold colors going here. Get some more yellow going there. You can definitely turn your page upside down if you find that easier when you're doing some of these leaves that are on the top. And finally, I'm going to use my Simply Simmons round brush to do these little twirls. I think it's going to give me a little bit more brush control. I'm going to turn this one into another leaf. I don't know. I felt like maybe I was overdoing the swirls there. Oh, and one more thing I want to do with this is maybe throw a little bit of my brown or purple, maybe on the stem side, like the shadow side of the stem. You can decide if you want to do this. It's optional, just adds a little bit more shadow into here. Don't want to go overboard. I'm just going to soak it up a little bit. I feel like maybe I'm a little too dark. And there is our pumpkin pattern. And then I'm going to just very quickly go in and do all these little tiny crowns on my berries. You want to do this when it's completely dry. You could even use a pen for this if you rather than a paintbrush. Then I'm just going to go over this and fill in the words "give thanks." But again, you can use a pen if you prefer. I'm going to try it with paint. You could even write words on a smaller scrap of paper and then use that with some cardstock and adhere it to the front of one of your pattern cards. So I'm going to just quickly show you how I would go about assembling these into cards. Depending on how wrinkled your watercolor painting is, there are times that I will take this and I will iron it. I'll place it between two pieces of paper towel, or I should say two pieces of paper towel on each side of the card to kind of create a sandwich, and then turn it this way and iron the back. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead. I've already put some pieces of tape on here. I'm using two-sided crafting tape. So I've put several pieces on here, and then I'm going to just lift the back off of them. Having multiple pieces does help hold the watercolor paper down. I tend to use more on my watercolor paintings than I would on just regular cardstock. Then I'm going to take my painting and I'm going to place it down onto my colored cardstock. And of course, this was the painting that we did slightly smaller than our card size. So place it down. And then on the back of my cardstock, I've put two-sided crafting tape as well. The tape is clear, but you can see it there. Then I just go ahead and adhere that to the front of my card. And there we have our cute folded fall card. Now with this, of course, I would adhere this directly to my folded card. And then you can put your little message on there. And to do that, I've once again put my two-sided crafting tape on the back of my little message here. Then I'm going to grab my piece of cardstock, colored cardstock, and I'm going to lay that down, trying my best to get it centered. And then on the back of this, I like to use, you can use just your regular two-sided crafting tape again. I like to use a tape that's actually got some dimension to it. So like this tape here is, it's two-sided crafting tape, but it is a little bit thicker. It's like a foam tape. Or you can use little dots, foam dots. I actually really, really like the little foam dots and I use them all the time. But today I went ahead and just used some of this tape. And I'm actually going to put one more piece in the center just to help give it some stability here. So this is the foam crafting tape. Then I will once again pull the backing off and attach it to the front of my card. I hope this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, that these cards will enhance your fall celebrations, and that you've been inspired to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye!